This is Minda Wilson from Urgent Care, and today I'm pleased to welcome Renee Stern and Leo Tonkin from Salt Chamber. They have a very interesting business, and I'd like to start talk with Leo. Just sort of, you have a very interesting background. You know, you started working as a consultant. And you worked with Covey on the 7 Habits. So tell me a little bit about that and the work you did prior to Salt Chamber.
Sure. Thank you. Well, my career started many, many, many years ago, so we don't need to date ourselves, but I was involved as corporate leadership and executive coaching was emerging back in the 80s. And so my career really was involved in working with senior executives, C-suite executives, leadership teams, and management teams in implementing a variety of training programs focused on performance, effectiveness, and productivity. That migrated to working with companies in how do you change behavioral cultures inside of organizations and groups. And so a lot of my work evolved over the last 30 years, where really it was more of a strategic approach on how you interact with customers, how you interact with your own staff, how you create a brand, and how do you go to market. And when you take a look at the business work that we've done, it always was revolved about how do you bring something into existence. And when I first learned about salt therapy, it was almost 9 years ago, I was fascinated by it. I didn't know anything about it.
What was your first time? Like somebody walked up to you and said, "Hey, have you heard about salt therapy?" What was your reaction to it?
Well, I knew somebody who was from overseas in Europe, one of the countries that was manufacturing some of the equipment. And we got into a dialogue, and that's where I was learning things that I didn't know that I didn't know. I knew that salt therapy had therapeutic qualities. I gargled it with it when I was a kid. You know about saline solutions, being by the ocean, growing up in South Florida, it was always healthy. But I never heard of a medical treatment or a therapeutic treatment where there was a device that crushed pure grade sodium chloride that you would sit in a room to breathe this in, and it had these health and wellness benefits. And so coming back from my father being a physician and being what I thought pretty much on the leading edge of what's happening, I was struck that I never heard about it. And so as I investigated, I started to look at what the market was like here in North America. And back in 2012, there was maybe about a dozen facilities in both the U.S. and Canada that were even offering this. And so that's when we started to take a look at what is that marketability, and applying the same principles and technology I had my whole career of understanding the marketplace, how to create a brand and develop a strategy. Salt Chamber was created, and we started to penetrate and bring this modality, mostly through education awareness, to the spa and wellness community.
So how does the salt in the salt chamber actually work with the body? Like, what's the science behind it?
Well, there is the distinction between wet salt therapy and dry salt therapy. So let's start there. A lot of people compare halotherapy. Halo is the Greek word for salt, which is what dry salt therapy is about. Salt that has been saturated with some moisture, like you would have by the ocean or in a saline solution or in a neti pot, is not as absorbent as dry salt. So just like you take salt and put it on food, or like an eggplant to draw out moisture, when you inhale these particles that are smaller than the diameter of your hair, they are micron sizes, and they penetrate the respiratory system, it's pulling out and absorbing the mucus. It's pulling out the allergens and the airborne stuff that you and I breathe in our system, really the invisible things that we can't see, that's in the air that we breathe, whether that's indoors or outdoors, which often is the cause of allergies, airborne diseases in terms of getting flus and viruses. So it's super absorbent. Another characteristic is that it is anti-inflammatory. So when you inhale the dry salt, it helps open up the air passageways, if you will, just like a inhaler would for people that have asthma or people with respiratory conditions such as COPD. And so it helps increase the oxygen flow. Athletes do it to get more oxygen to the red blood cells. So it has the anti-inflammatory characteristics. And the third is that its salt is antibacterial. Salt literally kills bacteria and viruses. You know, in the old days, and they still do it in battle, if you've got a wound, you put salt on it. So internally, as you inhale this salt, if you have colds or flus or viruses, it really stops from any kind of spreading and starts to deteriorating the cells from spreading inside of a salt environment.
Does it stay in your lungs? What happens to it? I mean, like, I see you inhale it, it's in your lungs, and it's drawing these toxins. Sure. But then what happens then? You know, it's still in your lungs, right? So I mean, the respiratory system is very different than the digestive system. So people that would think that they're on a low sodium diet or have high blood pressure or hypertension, for example, that's the dietary system. That's a different system. The amount of salt that you are inhaling, being in a salt room or a salt booth, is about 10 to 25 microns per cubic meter, which is a technical term to mean it's not a lot of salt. And what happens when you breathe it in, it's water soluble. So oftentimes it will pass through your urine system and just expel out. Some people, like myself, when I had a personal throat cancer and I had a tracheotomy at one point, I had a lot of mucus. And so some would maybe expel it out or cough it up. But it's water soluble, so it passes through our system one way or the other. So so it goes into the lungs, it draws the stuff out, and then how does the water get into the lungs to get it out of your system?
That's your natural urinary system. I mean, your body composes waste, so that's what happens. It gets into your waste system, and that's how it's removed.
I see. Okay. So the urine, I guess the urinary system somehow interacts with the lungs, and then the salt is expelled through your waste system.
Yep.
Oh, interesting. So I was thinking maybe you breathe it out or something. I wasn't quite sure what the technology was going to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you breathing in. I mean, you're basically in a room. You really can't see the salt particles, and you're just breathing normally inside of the room. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's no different when you go into a steam room and you've got steam around you. You're breathing it in. When you're by the ocean, you're breathing it in. People that breathe in aromatherapy are in a room and they're breathing particles in. Just like indoors, our indoor air pollution is 5 times worse than outdoor. You're constantly breathing in particles. Mm-hmm. Your respiratory system acts like a filter. And for many people, there is allergic reactions. There are particles that get stuck within your respiratory system. And that's what the dry salt therapy helps detox and clean out.
So it's sort of like people that have asthma and use a nebulizer. They breathe it in, it goes into the lungs, it draws out whatever, or it's anti-inflammatory like the nebulizer, and then they breathe out the chemicals when they exhale. Is that sort of the way it works?
Part of it, some of those chemicals in a nebulizer, though, or a breathing treatment, or as an inhaler, may have different effects into the system as well. That's why this is a natural and alternative and a complementary type of a treatment, which in many countries in Europe is covered by their health insurance. Here, it's not at that level yet, but you don't have the side effects that you do from treatments that have chemicals and different drug qualities that are in them for having other side effects, like you do by taking steroid inhalers and some of the other types of chemicals.
I see. So who does this type of therapy help?
If you breathe, this will help. Obviously, there are people that have respiratory conditions ranging from allergies, asthma, bronchitis, cystic fibrosis, COPD. I mean, if you take a look at the world's population and you combine the top conditions that people are facing, including what the pharmaceutical companies are making their most money on, it has to do with respiratory conditions. Part of that issue is the quality of the air that we breathe indoors and outdoors. So who this affects literally can be pretty much the entire population. Obviously, there are some people like those that have cystic fibrosis that are really need to manage being in closed environments with other people. So being in a public salt room is not their best alternative, which is why Rene has been involved with a lot of activities with people with cystic fibrosis for bringing this to the home use. But from a commercial setting, you have people that are kids that do this, seniors, you have athletes, you have people that are doing this just for general wellness, just like as you would go and take care of your teeth with a hygienist, or somebody doing normal routine of taking care of themselves and working out, whether it's physically or aerobically, and you want to take care of yourself. This is the only way that you really can create a respiratory hygiene to really take care of one of the most important functions, which is the breath and the breathing that we do.
So Rene, you work with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. So how have you seen this therapy help people who have cystic fibrosis?
It has helped tenfold, increase of 90% of lung function. People they typically get a salt booth for their home, because you can have salt therapy in a salt booth, which is kind of like a typical, like a phone booth that people see in Europe, the red phone booth, 4-foot diameter space, kind of, it's very small unit. Or you can have a salt room. Typically a salt booth will go into their home, and because the cubic meter of airline space is smaller, you can actually sit in the booth for 10 minutes versus 30 to 45 in a salt room.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a really great express type of service. And because of that, people with cystic fibrosis or COPD, things like that, they actually are in and out in 10 minutes, and they have typically sat in a booth for up to 3 times a day.
So can you give me a story about someone, a more specific example of how it's helped someone, so that it's a little clearer about what the benefits are?
Sure. I had a Make-A-Wish Foundation, actually in Portland, Oregon. Actually, they contacted us to help a little girl who was 8 years old, and she had lung failure, and she was too young to get a double lung transplant. So they actually called up, and she was doing some internet searching and actually found salt therapy. Her pediatric pulmonologist referred her to salt therapy as well, because there's nothing else in the interim until she's old enough to actually receive the new lungs for her to have a possibility to continue her life. So she called us, and we worked out a great arrangement, and she is using the booth. And basically, she's in the booth about the same thing, about 2 to 3 times a day. And her lung function has increased by 40%. And
Amazing.
She's breathing better. She's remaining stable, and hopefully to allow her to survive long enough when she's old enough to get a transplant. I'm going to bring up another example is someone who's 21 years old today, and he is actually on the advisory board for cystic fibrosis as well. And there's a young son who is now 21 who was diagnosed when he was about 18 months old, I believe, with cystic fibrosis, and he was having severe problems in and out of the hospital, not knowing what would happen. He lost energy. He lost hope. He was really struggling, a very young kid. And then growing up, and he was doing all the inhalers and so forth. They got a home salt booth, after the mother was advocating so much to try to find something else more natural to do. And his respiratory therapist, after doing more of the exercises they were doing, found that she had less activity that she had to do because of salt therapy. After sitting in the booth 3 times a day, he actually had reduced his lung infections by 90%. His energy went up, easier breathing. He was outside doing physical activity that he was never doing. And he is now basically living a very healthy, happy life. At 21 years old, and he thought he would not make it to the age of 10 or 15.
Wow. I understand that this has been helpful for firemen and veterans as well.
Yes, that's correct, for the same breathing apparatus as well. Leo, I think you may want to go into a little bit more of this in terms of the suits, the firemen's suits, and how the oxygen levels and how salt therapy can actually help in terms of that as well.
People that are exposed to different conditions, I know that a lot of first responders, and particularly those that are in fire and rescue, when they're coming into different elements, whether it's chemical elements, whether it's elements from the air, the quality of the air, especially with smoke inhalation, et cetera, they currently do have protocols. Obviously, there is oxygen that they're utilizing when they're in their mode of responding, but there really hasn't been something to help detox, clean out that system. And so if you think about those that suffer from smoking and are going through smoking cessation programs, salt therapy, halotherapy can be a great protocol. So after being on a call where people are exposed to the elements from whether it's air pollution caused by man-made products and chemicals and fires or whatnot, can really help in the detoxification and the clearing out of the respiratory system by the dry salt particles that are being inhaled.
So is this? I'm not quite getting. Is this? I understand it can help you eliminate, but is it restorative? Like, I hear you improve your lung functions, but do your lung actually get better?
There's nothing that you can really say that it cures. So, this doesn't cure. We can't use that language really. There's people that relieves their symptoms. It can do a lot of different things in terms of what Rene is talking about with people that have cystic fibrosis or COPD. There are plenty of research and studies that have been done. And because this is a relatively new modality to the United States, and while there are some studies that have been done here in the States, the 140 pages of research articles that the Salt Therapy Association has compiled to validate the medical research that's been done by pulmonologists and respiratory therapists, et cetera, from a lot of the clinical studies done overseas in Europe and throughout other parts of the world. Clearly, there are specific measures, including double-blind studies with control groups, to show being in a room with a halo generator, which is the device that actually controls the salt particles in the particular environment, like a salt booth or a salt room, has research behind it. So there's a lot of different measures, but I would not go to say it's going to cure this or get rid of that, because I don't think even medication and pharmaceutical companies are going to say that. But in terms of the thousands of people that are getting salted every day to over 1,000 facilities around the country and growing, there are amazing stories about how this has impacted people. And it's not just for respiratory, it's also for skin conditions. So when you are exposing your skin to the dry salt particles, because these particles are so small, it actually penetrates the surface layers of the epidermis. And a lot of people that have conditions like eczema and psoriasis often get those breakouts because of inflammation. And because the dry salt is anti-inflammatory, it accelerates the skin returning back to a normal balance and pH balance as a condition. So it's both for respiratory, skin, and general wellness.
And let me just step in for 1 second. What I wanted to add to that is that because of the increase of blood and oxygen to the brain, it's increasing mental alertness, energy. It helps to reduce anxiety. It's overall, your body after a certain period of time too will begin to have a well-being of resistance to even certain illnesses. The antibacterial effect helps to balance the pH of the skin as well. So the firefighters, with all this inhalation of the toxicity of the smoke that they're receiving, and sometimes the suits are not completely 100% covering their skin to the point where they're not having any issues with their skin. That smoke is still going into, they're under huge, huge heat. You know, the pores, when you're under heat, pores open, they expand. So anything that you're inhaling, anything that's coming your way is going to also penetrate the epidermis at some point. So it's also going to help with the skin conditions as well. They can end up with psoriasis, eczema, dermatitis, contact dermatitis. And people who actually, firefighters, if they even have, which I even have, rosacea, things like that, they can actually reduce the effects and help to provide relief for that. So those are the other ancillary type of things that can happen, especially reducing inflammation in the body, is number one. Huge, huge. And so if we can, really contain that anti-inflammatory issue, as we all know, that's the main culprit for any disease.
And hasn't this been around for centuries? I mean, people have used salt therapy for hundreds of years.
Well, it's evolved from the salt mines that we're familiar with around the world, and particularly in Eastern Europe, where you had people hundreds of meters underground mining salt. And it was in the 1800s when the physicians of the time were noticing, as there was a lot of plague and disease, that the people that were working in the salt mines were healthy, and they were healthier than others. And they started to examine the characteristics. Now, while the natural salt that they were underground with after they were chiseling and mining it, and the venting and draft systems that are in a mine underground helped create that environment, that was what was called speleotherapy, which is about being in the salt mines, if you will. And the environmental conditions were different. When you're underground, you don't have any kind of radon or radiation from the sun or other exposures of airborne pathogens. The humidity and the atmospheric pressure was different. And so it wasn't until the mid-1970s when the Russians first developed the first halo generator, which was designed to mimic the salt particles that are in the air. And thus the very first salt rooms started to open up in Russia in hospitals, clinics, daycare centers. And at the fall of the Soviet Union, it started to spread throughout Europe and started to branch out. And so that's really how the evolution of speleotherapy became halotherapy, which is what dry salt therapy is all about, which is what we were bringing here throughout the North American market. And now we're making more and more people aware of this modality.
And this is different than wet salt therapy, right?
Yes, very different, as I said earlier.
What's wet salt therapy, so someone knows the difference?
Well, wet salt therapy is, let's say, saline solutions. People clean their contact lenses. People know the quality of what salt does. If you are in a hospital and you get an IV solution, salt is by nature, we need that to survive in. And so there's various ways that wet salt, like in a nebulizer, when you have a breathing treatment, often sodium chloride, along with other chemicals, may be part of that. Just like using a neti pot in cleaning out your nose or gargling, that's salt mixed with water. And there are some treatments even in bathing with salt water. So salt and water have been friends for a long time. Dry salt has a different characteristic in what it's able to do as well. And so there's a big distinction between the two.
If you're thinking about doing salt therapy, if you have some of these conditions, is it something you should talk to your doctor first about? Like if you have COPD, emphysema, cystic fibrosis, should you talk to your doctor first, or is it something that anyone can do?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's very minimal contraindications, but whenever you're looking at doing anything, whether it's exercising, I know it's the New Year's resolutions and people are starting to work out and everything. I don't know if people are going to their doctor and asking, should I do yoga or not, or should I go to the health club or not, or should I go on a diet or not? So I think people need to be appropriate about it. But if you have any questions about it at all, we always encourage people to say, hey, if you want to, please consult your, licensed healthcare professional to see if this is something that's right for you, especially if there's some concern with certain conditions, whether somebody might have lung cancer, emphysema, or if there's some conditions that they want to check out. Given that most facilities and spas are not licensed medical professionals, they should always, when in doubt, consult your physician.
Yeah. So this has been really fascinating. And if people want to learn more about salt therapy or they want to contact you, what's the best way they should reach out to you?
Well, we have a great website at saltchamberinc.com. That's where people that want to find out about the modality or think about this as a business opportunity or bring this into their personal home or whatever they're taking a look at. If people want to take a look at more about the research and the information behind it, I strongly encourage people to look up the salttherapyassociation.org. And that is a great website that has all types of resources, as well as a directory for people to look at where the nearest salt facility might be located near them.
Yeah, because it might be great to try it before you dive in 100%.
I was just going to say, absolutely, and we're located in Boca Raton, Florida. If anyone is wanting to fly down to Florida in a more warmer weather to visit our showroom.
So just for people that are suffering from serious illnesses, are there any financial supports that might be available for people who may be able to use it? Does insurance cover it? Are there other opportunities to get supported so that they can have access to this kind of treatment?
Yeah, great question. Currently, healthcare insurance companies are not necessarily covering it, although there are some people that we are aware of that are putting this through their flexible spending accounts or their HSAs. And as more and more of this industry gets known and people experiencing the benefits, I think we're going to start to see more of acceptance in mainstream medical, including insurance companies, given the impact it makes, particularly as Rene shared earlier, of, let's say, keeping people out of the hospital that have cystic fibrosis or COPD. There's tremendous savings that people have by being in a salt facility, which is why corporate wellness is a whole other market where when you look at absenteeism, people getting sick, productivity, the cost of that, what is it to keep people healthy and more productive? The savings are there. So I think it's just going to be continuing to evolve.
Well, I really want to thank you both, Rene Stern and Leo Tonkin, for coming on our show. And if people are interested in learning more about this, they can certainly go to your website, saltchamberinc.com. And I'm excited to keep following you and find out the progress of Salt Chamber Inc. And as you get more entrenched in the opportunities for people to make this service available for them. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
This is Minda Wilson for Urgent Care.